Our speaker today, Dr. Alok Kalia, is a retired professor from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston and a longtime member of the Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church. For the past 12 years, he has been a professional speaker for business executives on health issues. His core beliefs come from Hinduism, but he puts them into practice as a Unitarian Universalist, and he spells his religion Hindu. In today's talk, Dr. Kalia traces the 5,000-year history of Hinduism and reflects on how some of its precepts might be food for thought for modern-day Unitarian Universalists. Let us listen carefully to the wisdom that Dr. Kalia will share with us. May our hearts and minds be open to the power and the insight which weaves together the scattered threads of our experience and helps us remember the wholeness of which we are a part.
I'm here today to talk about Hinduism, but I will also briefly mention Christianity, a religion with which all of you have some familiarity. The differences between the two will help to better place Hinduism in perspective. Christianity says, seek and you shall find. The focus is on finding. Finding God will transform you. That's what being born again means, right? Also, you have one lifetime in which to find God, and if you do, you will ultimately end up in heaven. Hinduism, in contrast, says, seek and you shall find. The focus is on seeking. Hinduism says that the seeking, the journey, will transform you. And this journey may take many lifetimes. For a Hindu, life is a book of many chapters. And just like in a book, each chapter influences the next. The way I live this life will influence my next life. We each write our book a step at a time, one life at a time, chapter by chapter. The goal is not to get to a place called heaven, but to perfect yourself as a human until you exemplify the divine. Now you merge with the divine and you step out of the cycle of birth and death. Hindus call this freedom moksha. Buddhists call it nirvana. Also, Hinduism has no founder, no Abraham, no Jesus, no Muhammad. It has no single holy book, no Torah, no Bible, no Quran. Instead, it has many, many holy books, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita, which I've already mentioned. And each book in Hinduism looks at divine from a slightly different perspective. Hinduism also does not have a God who sets down laws and punishes you if you are found wanting. In fact, the concept of God in Hinduism, at the highest level of Hinduism, is neti, neti, neti. In Sanskrit, neti means not that. So God is not that, not that, not that. God is not, or the divine is not an entity that can be visualized. Instead, Hinduism says, Tat Tvam Asi. Tat is that, Tvam is thou. Asi is art, that thou art. That each of us has a spark of divinity already within us, though it is not easily perceived. Houston Smith, a well-known writer on religions, put it this way. Think of that spark of divinity as a light bulb that is surrounded by a dusty lampshade. Our job is to clean that shade until the light shines through. Now, let's step back a little bit into history. Hinduism has evolved through three different phases. In the earliest form, perhaps 5,000 years ago, It was a nature-based religion. It personified the forces of nature. Surya, the sun god, Agni, the god of fire, Indra, the god of thunder and lightning. We humans made sacrifices to ask the gods for favors. The sacrificial ceremonies were accompanied by hymns that were sung in Sanskrit. These nature gods do not play a major role in the life of most modern Hindus, but the hymns still exist and are used during important events in life and at death. These hymns and the rituals are the contribution of the first phase of Hinduism. The second phase of Hinduism started about 3,000 years ago, 1000 BC. Instead of looking outwards towards the forces of nature, Hindu sages and scholars began to look inwards. The religion became mystical, spiritual. This mystical meditative phase of Hinduism is when the concepts of karma, you've heard about good karma and bad karma, was established, and also the concept of reincarnation or rebirth. The third and the newest phase of Hinduism started about 2,000 years ago, around the time of Jesus. That's when we Hindus began to build temples. Remember the concept of neti, 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 that God cannot be visualized? But most people need a God they can visualize. So, if you cannot see the face of God, can we at least look at the functions of God? What does God do? God creates, God sustains, and God ultimately destroys. So these functions were personified. Brahma became the creator God. Vishnu became the sustainer God. Shiva became the destroyer God. Now people erected temples to these deities and worshipped them. Also, Vishnu came down to earth many times as incarnations, the most famous of which are Krishna, you've heard of the Hare Krishnas, and Rama. People who associated with these divine incarnations also became holy by association, and so on down the line, which is why we Hindus have a plethora of gods. Worship of these gods is the most common approach to the divine in India today. But if one follows the God tree all the way to the top, through Brahma and Vishnu and Shiva, it ends up with Neti, 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 that unknowable, mysterious divinity. Of these three approaches, the worship of nature gods, the mystical meditative Hinduism, and the temple worship of deities, the mystical part, the internal search for the divine, is what appeals to me. Much of what I say next applies to this facet of Hinduism. How did this mystical Hinduism develop? Over the course of 1,000 years, countless Indian sages went on interior, introspective journeys. In deep meditation, the sages reached a state of consciousness in which all sense of duality, all sense of separation from the divine is lost. These sages began to document their meditative experiences, their individual internal journeys, in writings that are called the Upanishads. And by the way, Emerson was familiar with the Upanishads also. Perhaps surprisingly, there was a great commonality, a great overlap in what the sages experienced. It was as if a large number of tourists write about their individual impressions of a place they had all visited. let's say the Grand Canyon. By looking for the overlap in these descriptions, you will be able to build a pretty good picture of what the Grand Canyon looks like without ever having been there. So, what can we conclude from the overlap in the writings of these sages? The first thing that becomes apparent in their experience is that the divine has no form that we can comprehend. So, what is this unknowable divinity, this unknowable God? The divine, say the sages, is existence itself. You may have heard of Rene Descartes' famous saying, I think, therefore I am. Well, said the sages, it exists, therefore it is. All of existence, said the sages, the sun, the moon, the stars, the universe itself, is a manifestation of the divine. But there is more. Yes, the divine permeates everything that we can see. But there is more to the divine than we will ever see. There is a mystery to the divine that we cannot perceive, we cannot decipher. So the divine has a visible manifestation and an invisible manifestation. The sages call this mysterious divinity Brahman, not to be confused with Brahmin, which is a different word, Brahman. So let's have some fun. Let us imagine that the room, the sanctuary in which you are sitting, represents all of Brahman, all of the divinity that permeates everything. That sanctuary includes everything that exists, the earth, the moon, the sun, the stars, the galaxy. Okay? But you are also a part of the room, and technically so am I on the screen. So we are a part of this existence, a part of this room, a part of the divinity that permeates everything. Does this mean that you and I are also permeated by divinity? The answer is yes, we are. A tendril of the divine reaches out from the divinity and forms my core. I am a part of the divine, and the divine is part of me. The same is true of you. So in the Hindu worldview, my Hindu worldview, humans have two components. Deep inside each of us is a core of the divine. That light bulb I talked about earlier. Around the core is my earthly body with my earthly senses and my earthly desires. That's the dusty lampshade. In my day-to-day life, says Hinduism, I am not aware of the connection to the divine. I live by my ego. Our ego, my ego is the shell that you and I build around ourselves that defines our individual identity, our separateness from each other. I am I, and you are you. It sure seems reasonable because that's what I see. There are dozens of separate egos sitting in this sanctuary. But let's imagine that Jen was standing in front of me right now. As you can see, Jen and I are separate. Our only connection is through our senses. I can see Jen, I can hear Jen, and if I was in the room with you, I could reach out and even touch Jen. But that is it. Jen has her existence, and I have mine. But what we do not realize is that Jen and I are also connected. Well, what we don't realize that Jen is connected to the divine by a tendril of divinity extending out from that wall. Remember, this sanctuary is all of existence, and the existence is divine, and Jen is part of the divine. So there is a tendril of divinity extending from the wall into Jen. So she is connected to the all-containing divinity, and so am I. We are connected to each other by being part of the same existence. So if I hurt Jen in any way, that hurt will travel through Jen, through that tendril, into the wall, and come around to hurt me and all of you. On the other hand, if I do something good for Jen, her happiness will travel through her, around, and into all of us, into each of us. Let me show this another way. Suppose I was to crouch behind that lectern of yours with only my hands showing. In one of my hands, I have a sharp pencil, and I poke my other hand with the pencil. If at that exact moment an alien was to walk in through the doors of the sanctuary, an alien who only has incomplete knowledge of human anatomy, the alien would say the left hand hurt the right hand. But you would say, me, Alok, hurt himself, because you know that my left hand and my right hand are connected through my body, even though you can't see it. We are like that alien in our everyday life. We don't see the bigger connection between each other through this divinity, through Brahman. The highest goal of the Hindu life is to dissolve the ego, that the false sense of separateness, and gradually move towards this divinity, this unity called Brahman. This process of perfection, of elimination of the ego, may take many lifetimes. Until I can live my life with the complete understanding that we are all connected through the divine, I will keep being born again and again and again. I will keep going through the cycle of birth and death. Each life I live will affect the next. Any progress I make in this life will put me in a position in the next one to continue my journey towards perfection. When I can live a life that is free from ego, a life that recognizes the unity of all beings and all things, I will once and for all merge with the divine. Now, if you ask me whether I believe in reincarnation, in rebirth, I have to say I'm agnostic at best. I mean, there is no way for me to know. But I find it useful to live my life as if reincarnation is a fact. If I live a life that is altruistic and compassionate, a life that is less selfish and more selfless, it will make me a better human now, which is worthy in itself. As a bonus, if there is a next life, I will be born in a situation in which I can continue to improve. So how does one travel from selfishness to selflessness, from here to there? Well, says Hinduism, people are different, so it offers many different paths. One path is the path of observation, reflection, and meditation. For example, what we did just now was a bit of observation, that we are all part of the same existence. And reflection, what does that mean? A word about meditation. The ego is most active under conditions of stress. When I'm upset or angry, I'm more likely to snap at others, to be inconsiderate of others. Meditation calms the mind. When I sit down to meditate, I create a door between this daily world of stress, and I walk through that door into a world of calm. When I get up from meditation, I bring some of that calmness back with me. And when I'm calm, I'm more considerate, more compassionate. My ego is not as active. Regular meditation calms the mind and keeps us moving in the right direction. The second way to subsume the ego is worship. If I worship my favorite deity with concentration and devotion, says Hinduism, I give up my ego to the deity. You are everything, I say to the deity, I am nothing. There goes the ego. The third is the path of right action, doing what perceives to be the right thing. This is where karma comes in. Karma means creating or doing. This is the path Mahatma Gandhi followed. Now, people talk about good karma and bad karma, but there's a catch to this. What you really want is no karma. Think of each of us as having a karma basket that we carry around with us. Anything we do, good or bad, goes into the basket. If it is entangled with our ego. To continue in the right direction, we must gradually empty our karma basket. Otherwise, we'll be born again and again to suffer the punishment for bad karma or to enjoy the fruits of good karma. Now, most bad deeds are ego-driven. They are done for self-gain. So, of course, bad karma goes straight into the basket. But what about good deeds? If a deed is done because it is the right thing to do, with no expectation of material reward and no attachment to the result, good or bad, it generates no karma. If I donate to Habitat for Humanity because I feel it is the right thing to do, no karma is generated. But if the donation gives me a sense of pride, if it inflates my ego, boom, karma is generated. The deed is still good, right? But now I have generated good karma. I will be reborn to enjoy the fruits of the good karma. But that additional rebirth will delay my progress towards the divine. So generating good karma is okay. But in the big scheme of things, doing what is right without generating any karma, without involving the ego, is better. So there it is. I'm a scientist, but I also have spiritual needs. Hinduism fills them nicely. It encourages me to seek the divine by being a good human being in this life, whether or not there is another. It inspires me with the thought that there is divinity in me and you, and that I need to live up to that understanding, but gives me another chance if I stumble. It comforts me to feel that I am not alone, but am connected not only to all of you, but to everything. Perhaps even more important to me, when I look at the principles of my other religion, Unitarian Universalism, respecting the inherent worth and dignity, may I say divinity, of every human, the right of conscience, doing the right thing, and above all, appreciation of the interdependent web of existence, Brahman. I hear the Hindu in me saying, way to go.